welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at the 2020 presidential election as of October 13th, 2020. So what we're going to do today is take a look at the most recent comprehensive polls that have Biden ahead by pretty big margins in a lot of key battleground states. Look at what that means for the election, and look at what this makes the panorama for what the election will look like now that we're just less than two to 3 weeks away from this presidential election. So let's get started. At this point in time, we're seeing Joe Biden with a pretty heavy lead. We're seeing that during the whole of this election, Biden had very, very good points. Especially during the middle of the summer where COVID-19 was raging through American cities, and truly President Trump got some of the blame for that. But now, after the first presidential debate, and after essentially the COVID-19 diagnosis of the president, we've seen President Trump dive again in the polls. Now he's in his lowest point since he was back in mid-July, and now the race has one of the biggest gaps, if not the biggest gap, since the whole election season. So at this point in time, at a national point of view, where these polls specifically at a nationwide level, they really do not matter when it comes to individual who is going to win the Electoral College. However, this is a very big indicator, as we're seeing a pretty big number of voters that are just turning out for Biden in these polls. And of course, there's a lot of factors, and please remember that polls are very symbolic in a way. These polls are not necessarily going to be correct because there's a million other factors in this election. However, these polls, what they are very good indicators of what could happen at a nationwide level, and a 9% lead, a 10% lead are average in the polling averages, which can mean you have polls even as high as even we've seen 17%. We're seeing strong numbers for Biden, and at a general point of view, this is going to probably turn into an Electoral College victory because, again, to have 10% of margin of victory, I guess, at a nationwide level, you would have to be doing something very, very well, and you're going to have to be getting support in places that you did not think was possible, and I think definitely right now, that is something we're seeing with the Democrats. So now let's take a look at the polls individually of what we have from general election polls like nationwide. Most recent poll that's pretty credible, we could say the YouGov poll has Biden plus 8, Ipsos has Biden plus 10, and day in, day out, we're seeing these polling numbers that are giving Biden an average lead of 8 to 10%. We've seen extreme scenarios, and even in some of the best polls in the nation, A-rated Wall Street Journal, Fiorina polls, we're seeing Biden still perform even in the double digits. And we're seeing recent polls, which may not be that accurate due to some of these polls are conducted online. However, 1,397 people, 17% margin of victory for former Vice President Biden, which at this point in time is very strong for the Democrats. Now, let's take a look at how this transfers on to the other states, onto the key battleground state. And what way to start off but with the state of Arizona. Truly, this is going to be one of the crucial states of this election. And for Donald Trump, again, this is one of those states he needs to win, unless he wins like all of the Rust Belt. But this seat has become more crucial for Donald Trump, as the Rust Belt looks like a past dream at this point if we base it off of polling data. Again, like I've said, these polls are just 10 million other factors to analyze, but this is one of them, and I think it's important to analyze them individually. So right now in the state of Arizona, we have Biden with a 48.7 lead, or to 48.7 to 44.9, a 3.8 margin of victory currently in the state of Arizona. Pretty strong numbers in the state that voted Republican by around 3.5 points. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And what are we seeing here? We're seeing a lot of momentum for Biden for just one reason. He's appealing to these moderate voters, and since COVID-19 was such an issue here, Donald Trump is definitely taking a hit. And we see that Biden has been leading even before the pandemic really started to kick in. In this case, right before like March 14th, he was only leading by a little bit. The summer came and Biden hasn't had a big lead in Arizona, but over 5%, like he's had in other crucial swing states. However, we're seeing it narrowed down a little bit, but nothing to the extremities. It's not going to be super big narrowing down. However, we're seeing very strong numbers from Vice President Biden. Looking at the morning consult poll, we have Biden +3. We have Telegraph Group. We have Trump +4. We're seeing polls on both sides of the aisle. And most of the unbiased polls, I would say, have Biden up by 2, Biden up +3, Ipsos, all these different things. And generally speaking, we're seeing very good poll numbers in part of Biden in this state. They're not as high as they should be expecting, I guess, because truly the Democrats could have a bigger leads in these states. But I think truly because, again, you have to remember, there's also margin of error. And here in Arizona, they're in an extreme margin of error. Like, if you look at it, the more extended margin of error, they're definitely would fall within that. However, we're seeing Biden leading in that state. So 11 electoral votes that Trump has essentially would have flipped if the election was held today, and we based it off of polling data. Now let's take a look at the great state of Florida. This is my home state, and right now we're seeing a very interesting race here because it was neck and neck in the state of Florida. Donald Trump hasn't led since a pretty long time. I think he hasn't led. He only led like one day throughout election season. During the pandemic, during the middle of the summer where the pandemic got really bad in the state of Florida, we saw Joe Biden rise. Donald Trump dipped, Biden rised, and he had at a point a lead by over 7% in the state of Florida. Things started to narrow down definitely come late August after pandemic started wrapping up. It got pretty tight. However, again, we're seeing this state is a big contributor to the big downsurge for Donald Trump in his polling numbers after his diagnosis in the debate. And we're seeing Donald Trump gain some type of momentum in this state with some recent rallies held here. We've also have very, very big support and enthusiasm amongst a lot of voters, which is definitely important. But looking at basing it only solely on polls, 4.5% lead for Vice President Biden. Now, taking a look at the most recent polls, morning consult poll, we have Biden +5. Florida Atlantic University, we have Biden +4. And we see Emerson, one of the best, again, polling firms, or in this case, political science universities when it comes to polling data, an A- rated poller, which is what year is going to be the best according to 538. Biden +2. So the race in Florida is probably going to be somewhat tight. However, at this point, Biden has a 4.5% lead. Now let's go on to the state of Georgia. This is a state where it has increasingly become a lot closer. And throughout all of election day, we've seen it be pretty close. However, over the period of time where we saw the Black Lives Matter movement, where we saw the pandemic again surge and take over the state of Georgia, we saw Biden lead in the polls during the midsummer because that's the general time frame that the Sun Belt had the pandemic outbreak the worst. And then, we saw a period of time during most of September where Donald Trump was leading. Now, after this period of time of September, in October, we're seeing Biden taking the lead. Why? Because that was after the debate, after COVID-19 diagnosis for President Trump. And I think those are two events that we're seeing clearly have correlation to Biden's increase in polling numbers, Donald Trump's decrease in polling numbers. Looking at recent polls in Georgia, we have +2 for Trump. In a morning consult poll, a +1 for Biden in a public policy polling poll. And going down some older polls, we have some SurveyMonkey, which truly aren't the best of polls. And some of these are older. You have to look at the dates. However, I mean, most recent polls have Trump ahead. However, Biden still holds like a little bit of an edge because of that public policy polling, which is a pretty good poll. Put him ahead. And right now, Biden is only leading by around 0.6%, with his lead diminishing. And this is a state, for example, when we translate it onto the electoral map and take a look at the other factors, like historical trends, are the minorities going to turn out? This is a state that is very likely to go to Trump in some ways, even though the polling data might be indicating it's probably going to go to Biden. So that was the state of Georgia, and now let's take a look at the great state of Michigan. In the state of Michigan, it's almost like a blowout for Biden in a sense, considering President Trump won here in 2016. However, we have an 8-point lead for former Vice President Biden in the great state of Michigan. Very, very, very big amount of polling numbers. And at this point, this probably is going to tell us that a lead for Joe Biden and a victory come election day is very, very likely. And I just want to take a look at some of the recent polls where they're adding a lot of polls because this is a state they're very interesting in. Ipsos, we have a poll +7, +8 for Biden. Very good pollster. Morning consult, Biden +7. Yesterday, we had the Siena College and the New York Times. Very, very, very good pollsters and A+ pollsters at this point. +8 for Biden. And I think it just turns out to be that this state has definitely been trending a lot more Democratic. And we've been seeing a very big surge, or somewhat of, not a big surge, but somewhat of a surge in the state of Michigan for the Democrats, in part because of the plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer, which is, I guess, an October surprise in and of itself, and it's really impacted like a lot of the people in the state of Michigan in certain ways. Not going to be a very big amount of the population, however, some voters have changed their mind, and we're seeing that. And overall, again, 8% margin of victory for for former Vice President Biden, very, very strong. Going on to the next swing state, which is the state of North Carolina, we're seeing again very strong polls here, and for Joe Biden. This is a state that is going by a little less of what the Democrats could be winning by, I would say. However, it's still very good margin of victory, and truly Biden has started to surge again like he's surged nationwide. We're seeing this big trend of this bump right after Donald Trump's COVID-19 diagnosis. So this race was probably going to be close since it started narrowing up, which September was one of the best months for Trump until the last part, which really threw him off. And right now we're seeing very, very strong numbers for former Vice President Biden in this swing state that just tends to be very flip-floppy. Almost a 2.9 lead, almost a 3-point lead. And taking a look at the most recent polls, a Survey USA poll had him +5, so that's really what's giving Biden that big surge as of yesterday. However, Monmouth came out with 3 different polls: Biden +1, Biden +4, Biden +3. And then taking a look at some of the more recent polls, we're seeing very, very strong numbers, consistently polling +2, +3, +4. That gives us our average. And I think we're seeing a lot of polls during this election in some of these certain key swing states. I wouldn't say they could be 100% right, but I think they are definitely going to be an indicator. Now let's take a look at the state of Pennsylvania, which again, becoming very, very crucial during this election. And again, it's almost like a blowout for former Vice President Biden, where as of right now, he has over a 7.2% lead in the polls. Very, very strong numbers again, and that's something that we're seeing. Biden is overperforming Hillary Clinton. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen from here to 2 weeks. Keep in mind, millions at this point of Americans have already casted their ballots because of early voting. And at this point in time, things that would have been impacted for this election, we're seeing them happen a lot earlier. What did it for Hillary Clinton in 2016? Truly, that email right before the election really screwed her over. At this point in time, Biden has a lot of momentum, and it's very unlikely that he would get one of those big bombshells that would ruin his campaign. However, it's still possible, keep in mind. And I think at this point in time, we're seeing, again, strong numbers in Pennsylvania with recent polls +2, +8. In the most recent B-rated poll, at least, we have Ipsos, where with +7, +6 for former Vice President Biden. Again, it's something that we're seeing very, very constantly. Now going on to the next state, which is the state of Wisconsin. This is the last state of the crucial battleground state where Biden is essentially surging, growing day by day his lead over President Donald Trump. This is a state that was pretty close before the pandemic really started to hit heavily. However, again, it's almost like a blowout for Biden. At this point, the race is narrowing down a little bit. However, that big COVID-19 diagnosis, the debate really didn't help out Donald Trump that much per se. However, at this point in time, you have a 7.3% lead for former Vice President Biden. Very strong numbers. Again, and I think it's very important to note that polls are indicators, and I think that's something to keep in mind. Polls can be right, polls can be wrong, they could be off by a couple points, and I think that's something to understand. And we're seeing very good polls with a Biden +10 poll from the best pollster in the nation, the New York Times. We're seeing constantly Biden performing very, very well in these polls, and I think that just might be a sign that we might be in for President Biden come January 20th, 2021. Overall, that just covered the key battleground states that are truly the tipping points of this election. these are the states that are probably going to define who wins the election and who doesn't. And at this point in time, as we get closer, this big lead for Biden is historic, as this is one of the biggest leads we've seen in a very long time. And at this point in time, very, very interesting lead for former Vice President Biden. And the Republican Party must be right now in a frenzy to see what they're going to do, because either, one, they're actually losing by 10%, which, again, it's most likely scenario. There's other things that could be happening, like maybe the polls are being inflated a little bit with a little bit more data, but I doubt they've done that. However, I think these big surge for Biden, I find it like a little bit 10% nationally looks a little bit exaggerated. However, it definitely is a possibility at this point, because President Trump has divided a lot of people, and truly that is something that we need to analyze. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.